Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, theater, and entertainment. And I'm so excited today to be joined by the team behind the film Shiva Baby. We have Emma Seligman, who is the writer and director of the film, Rachel Sennott, who plays Danielle in the film, Molly Gordon, who plays Maya, and Dianna Agron, who plays Kim in the film. And Emma, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about some of the materials that you were looking at in making this film, and the fact that you looked at psychological thrillers as a little bit of a resource, because I thought that was fascinating the way you took that genre and transferred a lot of the ideas of it over into this comedic piece. And so I was really fascinated in what the aspects were that you saw as a linearity throughout that genre were that you wanted to pull into this film.
Totally. Thank you. Well, I felt like anxiety and Danielle's anxiety was going to be the main thing that we had to hype up in order to keep everyone interested in staying in this house in one day. So I looked for films that did that successfully, and a lot of them just happened to be thrillers. And then once I started watching them, it started with the movie Krisha. It went sort of like a just domino effect where I just started watching more and more, even beyond the one day, one location, after another, and taking from all of them. So it just was about what was going to work successfully, and then also how to just make a comedy seem different. I just feel like, not that this particular story has been done before, but I think I just wanted to stand out a little bit and try to cross genres, which I always appreciate in films when it sort of can't be pinned down in one specific genre. So, yeah.
And then Rachel, you also had appeared in the short film before it became a feature. And so I was really fascinated in your process of character development for the feature and how that really differed, because at that point you had this sensory experience of what it felt like to live in this character, to then take that into all of the added layers and added details that were in the feature version of the script.
Yeah, I felt so lucky to have been able to do that because I feel like it's very rare to get to do to live in the character and then time goes by and then do the feature. I honestly felt like I grew with Danielle as Emma was writing the script, and we talked about the character so much, and I felt like I was experiencing things in my life that were similar to the journey that Danielle goes through in the feature. So it felt natural for me, and then when it came to the feature I felt like I really knew her, so I felt it was great.
And then Molly, with the kind of like two-handers that you're in, where your character's kind of like goading and there's a lot of sarcastic humor, I thought what was really great about that is the way that you played a lot of the subtext of it. A lot of it's coming from a real emotional place where she's trying to understand her emotional situation and where this relationship and this dynamic is at between the two of them. So I just wanted to ask about the way that you really worked with a lot of those two-hander scenes to really find the emotional subtext and bring it forth in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much, the script for this movie was just so amazing. So much was just there. And then I just got to just live in that space. And then Rachel, I think I was just so taken with her the first time that I met her and just wanted to be close to her. And now she's my close friend, and that's amazing. And so I think just like wanting to get to know her more and investigate that. And then just living in what Emma had written. But yeah, I mean, I think so much comedy and like snarkiness comes from vulnerability. So it was just leaning into that, honestly.
Yeah. And then Dianna, I was interested in the way that you went through the script and not only looked at the lines of dialogue that your character says, but your character is someone who's spoken about a lot in the room. And it's really fascinating to look at a lot of the lines of dialogue that other characters relay about her and think about what's actually the truth and what's just an interpretation of someone that they don't know very well. So I was really curious about what details you pulled in as truth and what you thought was just an interpretation of your character from someone external that doesn't know her.
There's two lines that are said about her that were product of a conversation that Emma and I had, because as a Jewish person in the world, I thought that it would be kind of funny if there was a debate about how Jewish she was, because it was something that I experienced growing up. Were both of your parents Jewish, et cetera. And so the lines where somebody says, but I think your dad's Jewish. And the response is, well, that doesn't really count. Was something that resulted as of our initial conversation about Kim and, where she fit in and where she didn't. And, I think that as people in the world, you can make a lot of assumptions about somebody by the way that they present themselves, be it, the way that they dress, the way that they carry themselves. And so I really relish the opportunity to kind of enter that space and be more on the back foot because of, for several reasons. And I was just so happy to be a part of this. I had loved the short film with Rachel. She's so talented, and Emma's writing and her directing sense, just everything made sense to me to say yes and be a part of this.
And then Emma, I wanted to talk about the way that right from the very beginning, early on, you start to use the camera as a real form of building this sense of tension and anxiety throughout the film. By the end, the camera's right in the center, right up on Rachel's face with all the other characters coming very close to her, but you start building it gradually. So when you were putting together your shot list, how did you start thinking about the initial genesis and how you wanted to kind of gently start building it at the beginning?
That's a great question. I think that it was looking at those references and generally, I mean, it's sort of like a standard. I mean, I didn't feel that original in that we just started wider and then got tighter and tighter. But we did worry about getting repetitive. So I think it was also about just, using zoom or sort of having oneers where we didn't cut, it all feels like a blur at this point, but our incredible cinematographer, Maria Rusci, was just constantly coming up with ideas with me. I think a lot of it had to do with staging too, and finding different rooms to be in, some of which had more light coming into it. So it felt more like Danielle could breathe, or like she was by herself, or it had a cooler tone versus when we were surrounded by all the bodies and sort of creating a redness that permeates. I think that was probably the main thing that transitioned. The shots kind of, for the most part stayed the same, but the lighting got darker and darker and redder, and like hell was surrounding her. So yeah.
And with that mention there of finding different rooms and different spaces, you filmed for 14 days pretty much in one location, and yet there's a constant feeling of motion in the way that you bring the character onto characters, and you're constantly moving throughout the film. So it never feels static, and it never feels claustrophobic in that sense of why haven't we gone anywhere else? Because there's always new discoveries. So I was really interested in how you took that singular location and always found new covers and new different ways to bring us inside of it.
Thank you. I think that it was just sort of maximizing everything we could and taking us outside, like, around the corner with Maya and Danielle, and then also outside at the start and then outside at the end. The bathroom, like it was just trying to like get into every corner of this house and make each little corner feel like its own thing. And then, differentiate which scenes we placed there. But also I think it was a wonderful collaborative dance of trying to figure out where to stage actors, especially with what we could afford and extras, so that was a beautiful experience, but also challenging with our producers and our incredible assistant director, and a Lego set that we had of all the actors that were like, all these like mini figurines were like the size of like a room for this Lego set that I built, which I shouldn't have. Yeah, it was constantly a dance to just figure out how to make it fresh. So thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
And then Rachel, Molly, and Dianna, I wanted to ask about, in terms of that blocking and being in that central location, about the way in which it allowed you to have a lot of really nuanced explorations of character, even when your character is just appearing in the background, because the camera is always catching you and always picking up on you, even if you're not in the center of what the dialogue is at that moment. So how did that allow all of you to find these different, really minute ways of bringing your characters forward in scenes?
Mm-hmm. I think it really was representative of how that experience would feel. If you are in that close proximity, you never know who's just behind you, and so being more aware, especially, for my character who's trying to understand there's some strange things happening, and without getting ahead of herself, trying to understand if, if she's missing things, which she slowly realizes that she is. So I think that the location really helped the experience of this acting process, because it was very reflective of how the situation would be.
Yeah, and I feel like, for Danielle, she is like, I feel like there's so many people at the Shiva that represent different parts of her identity, or people that she's trying to hide something from. And so I feel like for me, I was always being like, who's where, I need to know because they can't hear this and I don't want these two people to be next to each other. So I felt like which Dianna, like sort of what you were saying too, where it's like so realistic because you're literally like looking at the person as you're talking about them.
And then Rachel and Molly, I wanted to talk about a lot of the scenes that the two of you have together and that idea of a power dynamic between the two of them. Because as much as there's also a power dynamic between Max and Danielle, there's also a real power dynamic going back and forth between your two characters. So how did the two of you map out and really think about the different stages and who has the upper hand and who has it when throughout all of the scenes that you share with each other?
I feel like I feel like there's like a shift that happens in the film where Maya gets like after the kiss after or before the kiss, where Maya lets her guard down and is vulnerable and honest with Danielle, and I think that's a big shift. But I think in the beginning, I Rach can speak to this, but I think we all know the person that's our family friend or in our family that everyone's always like talking up, and you're like, am I just a fucking piece of shit? And I feel like that dynamic is really at play in the beginning as well.
Yeah, and I think also when you haven't seen someone for a while, you don't know like what the footing is, and I feel like we're both kind of trying to like feel each other out in the beginning. In the first scene, it's like and I mean, doing that first scene was so fun because Danielle is like, oh, I didn't know, like just like giving herself away by trying to play it off cool. And then I feel like the moment outside is like, it's such a shift. And also that like Emma's choice to have it be outside, it's like a breath of fresh air in comparison to everything inside. So I think that's the big, I agree. Like that is a big shift in their journey.
Yeah. And then what were the conversations, Rachel and Emma, that the two of you had about that dynamic between Danielle and Max? Because that's obviously the biggest central power play of the entire film.
Yeah, well, I feel lucky because, we couldn't afford rehearsal time and I didn't know Dianna and Molly yet. So I didn't at all. So I didn't ask them for their free time, but Rachel gave me a lot going from the short to the feature. So we spent a solid week, I think, going through the script and mapping out Danielle's power with both dynamics. Like who is it, Max that has the power or her? And then, okay, so she gains power from Max and then she uses that power on Maya, but then she loses the power with every time she enacts on the power that she's just gained from the other person, she quickly loses it. So it was exactly what you were saying, and yeah, Rachel can speak more to this, but it's a power dynamic between the two of them. And then the parents get in the mix. And even if she has power, they just sort of get rid of it by saying something about her that, makes her seem like a child. So it was just tracking exactly that, each scene, does she have power or not? And how will she gain it or lose it?
Yeah, I just agree. Emma's just such a great director. And I felt so good about every scene because we talked about it before and I knew just what she was saying of mapping out the power, who's in control. And then how, once you have it, how quickly you can lose it. So yeah.
And then for you, Molly and Dianna, given that mention just now about the fact that there wasn't really space for rehearsal and for you to spend a lot of time together before filming, what were the most valuable tools that Emma gave you in terms of not just who your character was, but the overall feel of what this film was going to be, what the tone was going to be, so that you knew the world that you were walking into day one on production?
I think honestly, I met with Emma before doing the movie, and just from that conversation, I think our references were so similar, and just meeting her and seeing her was all I also needed to know. And then the general vibe on set was just so collaborative, and I don't know, it was just everyone was on the same page. And then I think Emma also, her direction style was let's try this many different ways and figure it out together. And she had a lot that she really knew and what she wanted, but she was also open to things changing on the day. And that's the best way to work.
Yeah. Was that the same for you, Dianna?
Yes. And then also I think just the added value of having seen the short film. So, obviously it was going to be a departure from that. There was going to be an expanded story, but you could tell Emma's sensibility as far as camera angles and color palettes and things like that. And, Rachel's acting. So that was super helpful, having that as a visual tool to go in with.
Mm-hmm. And Emma, you've mentioned how even when you were making the short, there was like a great discovery of some of the comedic elements of Danielle as a character from what Rachel would bring and some of the improvisation that she would create. And it feels like that's allowed you to lean even more heavily into it in the feature. And you both do such a great job at even beyond the dialogue, finding a lot of the small ways. Like I'm thinking about the scene where Danielle's just in the background continuing to load up her plate with food, and it's hilarious. And so I wanted to ask the two of you about a lot of the ways that outside of the lines of dialogue in the script, you really worked to find a lot of those smaller details of what the comedic moments were going to be.
I think that when you're in a house for one day, there's only so much standing and like talking you can do. So I think we both were trying to figure out ways for her to, especially with food, like just have her own little private moments, or with other characters, because there's just not much. You just need, the activity is like all you have, in a character, like there's only so much you can get from just their words. So I think, I don't know, Rachel has quite a physical sense of humor as well, but I think it was, I don't know, at this point it feels like a blur because I shared so many drafts of the script with her that I can't remember like what I wrote and what Rachel was like, maybe she should do this instead. So maybe Rachel remembers, because I kind of don't.
I completely forget. I forget everything that's not today. This year is like that. But I feel like I do think there was like physical stuff, where just like in the space, there was so much to do with like fiddling. I mean, I feel like she's always fiddling with herself and her hair and her face, which I just do all the time in real life. And then we would just like, I think some scenes we would do like little improvs, or I feel like things would happen naturally. But yeah, it was just, I think there was so much there to play with the food. And yeah,
I feel like I was forcing you to eat more than you wanted to, unfortunately, because that's all we could do. Was just tell her to.
The scene would go on so long that I was like, yeah, I just have to eat this, like fully eat. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't gonna, once the bagel's in your mouth, it's like you should just have it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not worth it to spit out.
No.
But I do love that moment where you take some food on your plate and then put it back onto the plate. And that feels super relatable, when you're at one of those functions and you're trying, or whatever, you're convinced that you want the thing that you take, but then you don't actually take that, or you're trying to take things to be polite and you're like, actually, I don't. When I watched the film, I watched it with a friend, and the friend laughed uncontrollably at that part. I did as well, but it was like, I feel like that's a big laughing point. And then Polly always eating.
Polly was always eating, and it was always a choice. And then she'd be like, oh, now I have to eat my 20th meatball. And it was like, you told me that you needed something to do, so you chose that meatball as part of your performance, So it was just, 80 meatballs later.
I think she's probably eaten another meatball since our film.
No.
It's on her nose.
Yeah.
Possibly.
And Dianna, the sense of humor that you bring into the film is very different, because for all intents and purposes, your character is kind of the straight woman in the piece. And there's a real art form behind that type of comedy, because you have to really take on what everybody's doing and absorb it into your character. So how did you really navigate the space of creating that sense of comedic timing within the film?
I mean, thank you. I just was reacting to everything around me. Truly, there was just gold everywhere. And, between Rachel and Polly and Fred, and then, I think those characters are very fun to play, because you're just responding to what everybody's giving you, and, wondering what your face is doing in the process. You see it afterwards, I guess.
And Molly, I think one of the things that works so beautifully about your character is the emotional vulnerability and heart that you bring to her behind this exterior that she presents as well. You know, when she's there saying, I didn't see you at the service, it's almost like I was looking for you. I wanted to see you. And so there's a lot of moments of that within your performance. So I was really interested in how you crafted so much of that into her.
Yeah, I think so many of the people that are the most put together are actually the most kind of disheveled on the inside. And I think it was just such a gift to be able to play someone with those complexities. I don't get sent things like this ever. So I think I was just so game to dive into it. And then, yeah, again, it was just in the script. It was such a fantastic character. But yeah, it was just beautiful to get to play someone who's not saying what they actually mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Emma, I was really fascinated by the music composition because you use it for such juxtaposing tones. You know, there's kind of this horror thriller element that you were talking about earlier, but at the same time, it also adds to the comedy within the same moment. So I was really fascinated in how you worked with your composer and really thought about the dichotomy of those two different tones within singular pieces.
Yeah, totally. I think that my main sort of goal with the music was always to like track her anxiety. And I think, you know, music can lean into, you know, the romance, or music can lean into just comedy or into the drama and make it emotional. And I just always wanted it to be like trying to just track Danielle where she's at, because we so rarely get moments just by herself in the film. So I think it's a sort of thing where sometimes horror movies make you laugh, like when you're anxious you also laugh, or when you're supposed to laugh, you're actually like cringing. So I think we just sort of, whatever was happening in the scene would either make you laugh or make you like cringe. And I think different people interpret it different ways. So I think the main thing was just sort of like always hitting points where Danielle was like at peak, like, you know, panic attack mode. And I guess we didn't really think too hard about like, oh, is this going to be a funny cue versus is this going to be like a scary cue? I think, I don't know. I think we just sort of thought like, is this reflective of what Danielle's feeling like in this moment? And just sort of went with that. But I think it's sort of a mixture, and you can't predict if people are going to laugh or cringe. So I don't know. I hope it worked.
It does. And one of the other music elements that works so well is that song that everybody sings to Danielle towards the end. And it wasn't only the case that was a suggestion from Polly Draper. It's the fact that you took that on board and then really thought so conscientiously about stylistically how you wanted to bring that into the film. You know, the lighting that you have, the camera motion that you have. So once you heard that song and took that idea on board, what was the journey of then mapping out the stylistic visual elements to how you wanted that to be extracted into the film?
Totally. Well, we were going to shoot that scene the way that it's shot anyway, but we were just going to have the characters, you know, saying the lines of dialogue that they do before, where they're like, do you have a girlfriend or boyfriend? And so we planned for it to look that way. But I think that was one of those scenes where the song added so much more to it and making it this surreal sort of experience. But then also once we were doing the song, I was like, oh, I want all the actors to look dead into the camera. Like that was something that we hadn't planned for. So that was like one of those scenes that's such a great thing to talk about later, because so many decisions were made as we were doing it. The song being like the biggest one. I think the biggest sort of suggestion that I took in throughout the entire making of the film. But then it allowed us to sort of make things even more surreal and have characters like coming in and out of focus and like, you know, just like, even with Rachel, like I remember, sorry, now I'm like going back in time and I'm like, whoa, I remember us reading that scene out for the first time in hair and makeup and all of us being like, whoa, this is way too expositional. And Dianna being like, no. And we were rewriting the scene, us, me, Rachel, Dianna, and Danny, who plays Max, together, just sort of forgetting about the older parent characters. And then Rachel was like, so this is just a scene between us. You know, we're almost like not listening to everybody else. So I feel like that was probably the most collaborative scene and one that we changed immediately as we were, you know, doing it the morning of, out of all the other scenes in the movie. Now that you asked and now that I'm thinking about it. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Dianna? Where you were like, no, not Soho.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
We have the bachelor pad.
Yeah. It's just so interesting in those moments because you can really come up with such cool different choices. It's not to say that one was right and one was wrong. But I think it's always, to me, really exciting when you have a director and a cast that can work together in that way and trust each other, you know, because the thing is that Emma has incredible instinct and choices throughout, like both prep, shooting, and post. I remember visiting you one time in the edit bay and being so thoroughly impressed with just so calm, just yes, like trim it there, do this, you sub in this moment, like cut to here. And it's something that's so impressive about her.
And Rachel, with your character, so much of it is the dichotomy of the expectations that are being put on her. It's, you know, be the best Jewish girl that you can, do all of these things, but at the same time, look at this woman who's an entrepreneur with 3 businesses and is her own independent person and doesn't listen to what other people think about her, you know, and her parents are giving her all of this conflicting messaging. And there's moments where she really plays into it and is like, yes, I'm doing this, I'm following the right path, I'm giving you the answers that you want. And then there's moments where she pulls away and there's that rebellious element of like, actually, this is the life path that I'm pushing towards. So how did you really map out when she was going to fold herself into ideas of what other people want her to be in a conversation, and when she just kind of had enough of that and would be pulling away from it a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that so many young women experience this, where it's like, be independent, but like, and like date around, become like, be yourself, like, but have a career, and then like fall, but like have a boyfriend and all these things. And like, all of them are closing in on her. And I think it's in the script, in the dialogue. I think Emma did such a good job, like mapping that out, where it's like, there's times where she kind of challenges that. And then there's moments when she folds. And I think there's so many moments where everyone is quite literally like all closing in on her. And it's like, how long can she kind of like back off different advances before she like gives in? Oh, and pieces of her are like, even against her will, are like revealed about herself, like in the conversation with her parents and Max. It's like, how much can she hold on to before it's like revealed? So I think that was all in Emma's writing and the script, which was great.
Yeah, it really does come through in a lot of the lines of dialogue. And Emma, I know that you've talked about how in writing this film and making this film, it was a bit of an experience of writing things that people were projecting onto you as well. And so how was the overall experience of making this film just a real catharsis and being able to take all of that, absorb it, and exude it onto the screen through a film?
It was very cathartic. I think that you know, I started this short when I was 21, when I was about to start my senior year in college. And then now I'm about to turn 26. And I feel like I've sort of like, it's been a really nice way to sort of close the chapter of college and that time of like messiness. I mean, obviously it still feels messy and trying to figure out life, etc. But I think it felt really cathartic. I think the short felt a little more cathartic. And then when we were making the feature, I was like, trying to like just sort of dig back into the trauma and was like, okay, what did that feel like now? And being a little like psychoanalytical about it sometimes, I think, is not, even though I'm very proud of what we got, I think actually sometimes subconsciously just sort of like vomiting it out of you, just sort of bleching, is a lot more, it's just a lot easier versus with this, especially because it's one day. I was like, okay, what did that feel like when that family member asked me this, and like, what did this? Because I felt like I had actually started to pick up the pieces, you know, sort of beyond where Danielle is. And so I had to sort of like go back in time a little bit. But overall, very, very cathartic, because now I'm like, so I think, you know, feel lucky that I'm far beyond where Danielle is at, even at the end of the film. So it's nice to know that for sure with this being out in the world.
Well, I want to congratulate all of you, because every single person I know who's seen this film has just instantly fallen so in love with it. So congratulations on all of that. And thank you so much for this lovely conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate this.